You can holler, you can applaud, you can scream, you can do anything you want. I can't hear you anyway.
Well, Mike Rinder, thank you so much for joining me today on the Salt Lake Dirt podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Kyler. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So we're here to talk, about your new memoir, A Billion Years, My Escape from a Life in the Highest Ranks of Scientology. I just finished it a couple of days ago.
Yep.
It did not disappoint. I was engrossed in it. It was an amazing book. So thank you for writing it, first of all. I imagine this was a long time coming. I would like to kind of hear about, because you've been involved in activism for several years now. And then a book is just kind of like the natural place to end up. How long has this book been in the works?
Yes, years. And I always, like a lot of people ask me, please, would you just write a book, write your story? And I was somewhat reticent to do it for a number of reasons. First of all, as you probably now understand from reading my book, I've been involved in a lot of things, and it seemed a daunting task to try and reconstruct and recount them all. And I was very concerned always that Scientology keeps astonishing levels of written files and paper and records on everything that has ever happened. And that if I wrote a book, I would have to make sure that it was almost perfect in the accuracy of everything that is included. And otherwise that they would attack it as being fiction and would pick out bits and pieces and say, look, this proves everything in here is fiction. The second thing that sort of was daunting to me was it was sort of a little, I don't know, I'm not sure quite what the right word for it is, Kyla. Like PTSD,
Trauma,
back
right?
Memories that I didn't really want to have to relive or write about in particular. But what ultimately happened was I started putting together at least a sort of an outline and timeline, like maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And my wife kept saying to me, you gotta sit down and write. You gotta sit down and write. You gotta do it. You've got to do it. I'm like, okay, honey, that's easy for you to say. I'm the one that has to do it. And then COVID happened. And then I literally was sitting at home with nothing really that I could do.
Mm-hmm.
So I went, okay, it's time to get serious. And then I started writing seriously. It took me a good, number of months to then take that outline and flesh it out into something that I thought was sort of worthwhile. And then subsequent to that, it took a considerable amount of time further with an editor or 3 editors ultimately in the end, who were extremely helpful and in fact were a little more than editors. At least one of the women who helped me tremendously was almost like my therapist. She would ask me, well, so what were you feeling? What were you thinking? Can you explain this to me? And that sort of coaxed out a lot more of the sort of processes through which I went, getting myself first immersed in, then like fully committed to, and then starting to doubt, and then escaping, and then eventually eradicating the thought-stopping mind messing fucking stuff that I had been, in since I was 5 years old. So
Right.
there's a very long-winded answer to a relatively simple question. But then again, I do tend to ramble. So
I love
cut me off whenever you feel
perfect
like it.
for a podcast. That's a great thing for a podcast, because if people tune in, that's, if they stay listening, that's what they want to hear. So
Right.
I love it. I was just thinking about it, reading it, because I mean, you have been a very public face, and with the show with Leah Remini, The Aftermath, your daily blog, your podcast, like very, very active. So we're familiar with you, those of us who've kind of been following all, Scientology and the abuses that happened there. But I was just sitting I talked to someone who wrote a memoir a few weeks ago, and we were kind of chatting about, no matter what your life is, it seems like an emotionally taxing process, no matter what's happened to you in your life. Now, especially if you tack on trauma and horrible memories that you have to recount. So something your book is just one after the other. It seems like an exhausting process to have to go through recounting it. It sounds like worse and more tiring than therapy. In the end, cathartic, I would imagine, but it just that's why I asked. I was curious how long this would take, because you've been, like I said, a public face, but we know a bit about you, but you really, your focus is helping others, clearly. So you're there to support others. And like in the show, one of my, I love that show, and how, each episode has a different person, different people, and you and Leah are there to help them process their trauma. And, you give some of your personal stories, but the ultimate focus is the other person and helping them kind of creating a life after Scientology. So, I guess my point is not really a question. Well done with doing this. And props to you for sticking it out and writing the memoir, because I know, I have been super curious to hear the whole life story. And this was just like I said, a wonderful memoir, but it must have been exhausting for you.
Well, it was. And, I write at the end that when I finally sort of finished and felt satisfied that I had told the story of my life the way that I wanted to tell it, I stopped having nightmares. I had serious nightmares ever since I escaped the Sea Org. And that's a very common thing. I've talked to many, many people, particularly those who were at the international headquarters of Scientology, and this recurring nightmare of being back there and unable to escape had plagued me for years and years and years. Even 15 years on, still having those same horrible waking up like, oh my God. and those ended. And I have not had any further of those nightmares since I finished the book. And, if nothing else comes out of this book, that is a great thing for me, at least.
Oh yeah, absolutely. What a gift. I mean, you probably weren't expecting that. If that was the end game, that's brilliant.
Yeah, I know. I wasn't expecting that at all. In some ways, I sort of had it in my mind, well, it's probably going to get worse because I'm deliberately sitting down and reliving these experiences over again. And, would come back from the editor, well, what about this? What about, oh my God, I have to think about this. I go, oh my God, I have to put that in there. And reliving and reliving and reliving. But perhaps the reliving over and over and finally putting it into a form that I felt like, okay, I'm done. I've told the story. I've recounted the incidents. I've done my best to describe what I was thinking and how I was feeling and why did I not leave yet? Maybe that was the process that I needed to go through to get that sort of relief.
Yeah, I love that. I was talking to a novelist recently, and he's had some successful books and some books that just fell flat. And he said he got to a point, and he's written over about a dozen books. He said he got to a point where he didn't let it bother him if the book sold or not, because books tend to have a long life, he was saying, as opposed to maybe online content and stuff where it's like there's an insatiable hunger for it. A book, you may bump into it at a used bookstore or at the library, so it has a long life. And I was thinking about that comment, especially at the beginning of your book, when you write like an open letter to your adult children specifically. What a painful thing, but I think the beauty of that letter, you just articulated it so well, in such a loving way. You're being you're disconnected, you're shunned by people that mean a great deal to you, but this letter will live on, and who knows what will come of that in your life and in other lives. So I think just having, I guess I wanted to ask you, the having that in your mind, writing about your family, such a personal component of who you are, and having that torn away from you, how were you able to get through that and I don't know, come out the other end? I don't know if that makes sense, but I was just very taken aback and impressed with that whole letter at the beginning.
Well, that letter came about from a conversation I had with Larry Wright, the author of Going Clear, who I became quite friendly with. And I reached out to him at one point and said, Larry, people keep asking me to write a book, and I think I'll do it, but you're the best writer I know. Give me what your best advice is. And he said, write what means something to you. Don't write what you think others will. Write what you believe. He said, do you know what in my view, my best book is? I said, Looming Tower, Going Clear. Like, I rattled off a bunch of his, Pulitzer Prize winning, New York Times #1 best-selling, translated into Netflix, HBO show. And he said, nope, it's the compilation of letters to my parents, because that had the most meaning for me. And he said, knowing you, Mike, like I do, and your history, I think you should write a book for your children, the ones who don't know you. Maybe someday they will read it. Maybe you will no longer be around for them to read it, but your story will be there forever. And that's the sort of how this book came to be addressed to my two children that I brought into Scientology and the Sea Organization, who still remain there to this day, and the poster children for the Scientology fair game attacks on me. So I write in the book too about what it was like and why it took me so long to finally get out. And that was primarily because I didn't want to abandon my wife and two children, even though, as I detail at great length in the book, I really wasn't the father of those two children. I was the genetic father, but they were raised by the organization. They became property of the Scientology organization from the age of like 3 days until today. And they were what I believed were, at the time, I believed that they were very fortunate. I believe that they had been brought into the greatest environment possible for a child to grow up in, the innermost sanctum of the Scientology world, which is to a true believing Scientologist, the only good world there is. And, you know, like I say, I look back with great regret about that now. And I say in the beginning, if I knew then what I know now, you certainly would not be in the position that you're in. But I can't change what happened in the past. I can only hope to change what happens in the future. And that's sort of the philosophy that I operate with. I can't wallow in regret about things that have transpired in my life, things that I've done, decisions that I've made, because that won't change anything. All I can do is look forward and hope to bring about change to prevent things from happening that I believe were wrong or are abusive. And to that degree, I guess that's sort of the comforting thought process that I go through that has allowed me to deal with that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, you yourself, you know, as a young boy growing up in Australia, I mean, your parents came into this. You were at a young age yourself, and you're at the age where everything your parents do, you know, you don't question it because that your brain's not there yet. So you came in. How old were you again when your parents?
About 5.
Right. So that was, you know, that was your normal, that was your life, that was your reality.
Yes.
Yeah, so you also grew up in a similar, you know, situation, which I think, you know, in the future for them, if they do read this book, they can see that too. I mean, there's a lot of similarities. People who grow up in high control groups, when we grow up in them at a young age, you know, very different and unique, but there's very similar constants that kind of run through, you know, the person, the group, whatever. So, you know, I think a lot of people, including your children, are really going to relate to this book, and maybe forgive themselves, hopefully, if they feel regret at any point.
I certainly hope that is the case. You know, another massive source of inspiration for me for this book was Tara Westover. Her book, Educated, is an absolutely stunningly brilliant piece of literature that had a very profound effect on me, and I'm sure it has had a very profound effect on all sorts of people, no matter what their religious affiliation was growing up.
Mm-hmm.
Because her story, and hopefully mine, I hope speak to people who find themselves in all sorts of different unwelcome circumstances in their life. A bad relationship, a bad job, you know, familial difficulties, you know, who knows what, but everybody's got problems in their life. And I hope that people will take my experience as well, if that guy can do it, and he can escape at 52 years old and start an entirely new life with nothing, then I can do it. And maybe my problems, maybe the things that are so troubling to me aren't really as big as what that was. So I hope that the book speaks to a much wider audience than just people who've been in Scientology, or even just people who have been in cults. And that's my very sincere hope. I'm not trying to say that my book is at the same level as Tara Westover's book. I'm just saying that inspired me because I believe that there is a place in the world for people to be recounting their life history as a lesson and perhaps a comfort to other people.
Yeah, I would absolutely put it in that same category. I think, like I said, this is something I'm going to revisit over the years. Definitely, it's going to have a nice, safe spot on my bookshelf. And I think what what you just mentioned about coming out at 50 in your early 50s, that part I really enjoyed and found inspiring. Where you did run away, and then you were like, you're in survival mode, but then you also need to make a living, and you have nothing of a resume that anyone out there in the other world would be able to understand, but you had people that helped you, and
Yes.
it seems like you were able to pull some of the skills that were, I would imagine, natural to yourself, but also things you honed over years, being those insane work schedules and things you were put through and had to do. You jumped right into taking care of yourself, which was such an inspiration, and a wonderful thing. I would love if you don't mind talking a bit about that kind of, when you left the logistics, the everyday life of how you were able to kind of get on your feet and create a new life, and just kind of, people can do this. People can get through the other end.
Yeah. Well, when I left, I relied on 3 people who were also former Sea Org members who had escaped prior to me. Had they not been around, I don't know what I would have done, Kyla. I had no family to go to. I didn't know anybody other than Scientologists my entire life. I didn't really have anything, support network or system to rely on. I didn't have any money. I had worked in the Sea Org for 30 plus years, being paid less than $50 a week. I was not flush. So I ended up going to originally to a dear friend of mine called Tom DeVocht, and then subsequently from there, and I talk about this in great detail in the book, but subsequently from there, I went to live with, oddly, David Miscavige's elder brother, Ronnie, and his wife, Biddy, who were, it's funny. I talk earlier in the book about my efforts to prevent them from leaving.
Mm-hmm.
And, because of my relationship with them, they were probably the closest friends that I had in the Sea Org. Anyway, I ended up with them, and originally Ronnie had gotten a job as a realtor that I had helped him to get when I was still in the Office of Special Affairs to keep him out of trouble, quote unquote. In any event, he said, I'll get you a job as a real estate mortgage lender at our realty company. And I went and I had an interview, and it went great. And the guy thought I was like just perfect for the job. And shortly thereafter, the bottom fell out of the real estate market in the middle of 2007. And they said, we're not doing mortgages anymore. We're not hiring anyone. So Ronnie says to me, okay, look, I've got a friend at the car dealership, and you've always liked cars, and that's true. I used to subscribe to Road and Track and Car and Driver magazine, even in the Sea Org. I was like a car kind of a nut. So I went along and did an interview to get a job as a salesperson selling cars. And interestingly, it was like a family-owned series of dealerships, and the son-in-law of the patriarch of the business was a big sailor, like a yachtsman. And he had spent a lot of time in Australia. He was a crew member on the America's Cup and blah, 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 blah. So he and I hit it off really well, and he decided that he was going to hire me. And so I got a job selling Toyotas at the local Toyota dealership in Williamsburg, Virginia. And to me, working 5 days a week was like, I didn't know what to do with myself. 5 days a week, like 8 or 9 hours a day, I was sort of lost. Like seriously, it just didn't seem right. So I was working 6.5 days a week at 12 hours a day and thinking it was a cushy life of luxury. And because of that and that sort of work ethic that you mentioned, I was pretty successful pretty quickly. And I enjoyed it. I enjoyed meeting people. It was interesting to me. There were all sorts of different people that walked in, and every one of them had a different story. And none of them were Scientologists. And it seemed suddenly that perhaps the world outside the bubble of Scientology wasn't quite as evil and fucked up as you are told it is when you're inside it. And the activities selling cars sort of like just every day, it was like another kind of little bit of the onion peeled away of, hey, this isn't so bad. The guys that I'm working with, they're pretty cool. Yeah, everybody thinks car salesmen are asshole, shysters. There was some really nice people that worked there, like really nice. And, this guy from a Middle Eastern guy who was just the nicest man and took me home and cooked me Middle Eastern food and would bring in food for us for lunch. And it was just a very enjoyable time to get my footing, and everything was sort of new. I bought my first car. I got a great deal on a car that they couldn't sell at the dealership because it had 100,000 miles on it. But the used car manager, who I also became very friendly, was like, this is a great deal. This car will never break down. It's a Toyota Camry. It's got 100,000 miles on it. It's only 3 years old. Someone used it to commute. It'll go forever. And I'll give it to you for basically nothing. Mm-hmm. Like, I didn't even remember. I think I bought it for like $7,000 or something. It was a 3-year-old Toyota Camry. And now I had the freedom. Then I went and found an apartment. I moved out of Ronnie and Biddy's house and got an apartment. And now I could go driving when I had my time off. And I actually started spending less time at the dealership and more time doing things that I had never done in my life. Like the freedom to be able to get up on Sunday at 10 o'clock if I wanted, and then go, okay, well, I'm going to drive to Richmond today and take a look around, or I'm going to drive to Newport News, or I'm going to go somewhere and just see what's there, was quite, it was very liberating, very liberating. And so my sort of transition into the real world from that perspective was relatively smooth. It wasn't that difficult. I had nightmares. I had insecurities about things and worries about things that I probably shouldn't have worried about, but I succeeded pretty quickly at making money to live, and actually ended up having I didn't have any dependents to support. It was just me, I had a 2-bedroom apartment in the end that was like, I didn't know what to do with all the space. Like, I didn't have any furniture, so I had a card table and a coat rack and a bed. And, like, I gradually sort of accumulated things, but it was, I felt like it was living like a king. And probably to most people, they would look at me and go, this guy's kind of like basic. He's pretty basic.
Well, it reminds me of kind of, it's like the freedom someone gets when a teenager gets their license.
Yes.
Or coming out of high school or college and having that, like, oh, I can stay up all night and eat ice cream if I want. So it's kind of like when people leave cults and high control groups, I think that's a pretty common experience where you feel, the feelings that a person as a late teenager or early 20s, you experience this and you have this youthful, vision, excitement about the world around you.
Yeah, well, I was a little late to the party, guy. like 30 years late. But I will say, and I do want to stress, and I want to make a little plug for something. Without the assistance of Tom DeVocht and then Ronnie and Biddy Miscavige, and then Biddy's sister and brother-in-law, Jim and Sarah Maitland, I don't know what would have happened. And this is a story that has been repeated many times with people who have come out of Scientology. And I now know other high control groups or cults. So myself and the Headleys, a number of people that appeared on the Aftermath program began a foundation called the Aftermath Foundation, which is a nonprofit that is designed to provide a network and resources for people escaping Scientology. And that has been tremendously successful and tremendously satisfying to have something now that we have created that has helped so many people who in the past had to like sort of rely on luck or their particular skill to find where these people were. Now it's easy. They just need to contact the Aftermath Foundation. We'll put them in touch with someone in their area, someone to help them get a job, a place to live. We can give them money if they need it to get started, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's something that has come out of this whole experience that's been very, very positive.
That's wonderful. I'll make sure and put a link to that. I think one of the, if people are aware of that, that may help kind of unlock a part of their brain, because there is that fear of, I'm kind of stuck here. I have to make this work because I have no other option. I don't know anyone. I just can't do it. So something like this is the first. I've been familiar with the foundation. I'm sure there's other things like this, but I've never heard of that specific of a foundation that helps people come out of this. I mean, what a wonderful thing that's available to people who are leaving Scientology, because there has to be a lot of people who, at least the thought has crossed their mind. And on your, in your book, you mentioned that I think many times where, you little thoughts kind of creep in, but then you get checked by yourself where it's like, oh, I can't. Well, what would I do though? I can't do it. I can't do it.
Right. And ultimately, Kyla, because now this foundation has become pretty well, relatively well known. A lot of people from other organizations said, well, can we have one for us? And honestly, ideally, our objective is to grow the foundation to the point where it can, in fact, be a network and resource for anybody from any, like we're focused and have been focused on Scientology since we began, because that's what we all know. But we wanted to ultimately expand this into something larger. And if it prompts someone who wants to create a similar foundation for other organizations or other people that need help, we will help them any way we can.
That's great. It actually reminds me of a film. A friend of mine made a documentary several years back called Sons of Perdition, about they call them the Lost Boys who kind of escaped the fundamentalist LDS church down in southern Utah specifically. So a lot of those, teenagers, they come into St. George, which is the biggest, city down there in southern Utah. And he made a documentary about their process and just, especially coming out. I mean, I think there, in some ways, there may be some benefits to coming out later in life. Teenager in their 20s, they can make some horrible decisions that, could impact them. But anyways, so there was a group down there that did try to help them get on their feet, but the resources, weren't there. There were not a lot of people involved. So it's wonderful that something can, the Aftermath can, get such a well-known audience. People are aware of it. And I think, and then, like you said, other people can see, oh, this is a thing that, maybe my former group, we can do something to help. And
Yeah.
it spreads. It's great.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, so I want to go back to one thing I loved, because I'm a high school US history teacher. And so when you were at this period of your life we're just talking about, where you were selling cars, you said you kind of fell in love with living in Virginia, the US history, it's everywhere there. So I would just love to kind of hear about that, and maybe some of the things you found most interesting. And I love hearing, especially from someone who isn't from the United States originally, kind of what grabs them and what they find interesting.
Okay, well, I had no sort of clue that that little triangle, Williamsburg, Jamestown, Yorktown, is like if you wanted to cram history of the United States into one like 50 square mile area, that would be it.
Yeah.
And because you start with the first settlers and the enormous hardships that those people put up with. I mean, it's insane. Like there's a really wonderful museum at the site of that settlement, and it's sort of mind-boggling what these people managed to survive.
Mm-hmm.
And the lack of food and the cold and the Native American attacks and like how they managed to persist and survive through that is like kind of unthinkable.
Right.
And then you move over to Williamsburg, and you get, here's where George Washington raised the army, and they were all rallied there. And Williamsburg itself is a pretty, interesting, because the whole old city town of Williamsburg continues to have people dressed up like they were in colonial times, and making furniture the way they used to make furniture, and et cetera, et cetera. And that's all fascinating. The one that was most interesting to me is actually Yorktown, because that's where the end of British rule was sort of, the British Navy got the shit kicked out of them there. and that, standing on the remnants of the fortress there and reading about what happened, and those moments in history are so when you're there, they're so vivid. It's like, oh, it's almost like you can hear the sounds and see things, and it's like, wow, this is like, how did all this happen in this little part of the world? Because it's like the Colonial Parkway that joins Yorktown, Williamsburg, and Jamestown is only like 35 or 40 miles long or something, which is an absolutely magnificent drive. If you're ever in the area, drive down the Colonial Parkway from one end to the other, because it is stunningly beautiful, particularly in the fall, but any time of year. The summertime is also beautiful. That part of the world is like, and then Richmond is, just 50 or 60 miles away. And I went and spent a lot of time in Richmond because I found it so stunningly beautiful. I mean, it is a sort of, there were things about the South that were very, what's the right word? Aesthetic, like the homes and the trees and the big wide boulevards, and it's a very, very aesthetically beautiful city. Of course, with statue, or used to be when I was there, with Robert E. Lee and all the great Confederate leaders. But it's, I just found all of that stuff. I had never known anything about U.S. history. I mean, I didn't get taught much US history when I was in Australia, that's for sure. That's still very colonial.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't think that they teach a whole lot of US history in England either, other than those bastards got away from us. I mean, so I learned a lot, and I don't claim to be a history buff, but I found it fascinating, and it sort of made me want to know more about more things historically and how they went down and what did the people at that time go through. It's one thing to say, well, there was a battle here, or these people landed here and that was the first settlement, but what was life like for them? And I still am fascinated by that sort of stuff. Depictions of historical, events are things that I enjoy a great deal.
Right. No, it's so true what you said. I lived in Boston in my mid-20s, and that's when I decided I wanted to go to school and become a U.S. history teacher. So I never really had a strong interest in it, but I think I just live a few blocks away from Paul Revere's home.
Right.
So you kind of develop, it becomes real, and it's fascinating. I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent, but I'm thinking, I don't know if you've ever been to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania.
No.
You need to go there at some point next time you're anywhere near there. That was one similar to Richmond, but it's still a very small town. The cemetery there, the museum, all the monuments that kind of scatter the battlefield is unbelievable, and the tour guides there are outstanding and will walk you all through. Very incredible, place. But yeah, they're all over the East Coast, so it's that's great. It makes me think about you get out of a cult and you have these interests. You can spend time and you can drive places, you can do things. I loved when you talked about you got a stack of movies from Blockbuster to just get caught up on the past 20 years. So maybe I could ask you about that. So some of the films, possibly books that during this period of your life, what you kind of gravitated towards.
I don't know. I'm probably going to shock you with one here. I became somewhat of a fanatic of Boston Legal.
You mentioned that in the book. Yep.
I love that show. I love William Shatner. I love James Spader. I love the show. I love the humor of it, but also the sort of perspective about things, because it always presented these interesting perspectives. I mean, William Shatner was a genius at just coming up with the weirdest stuff that was like, well, that's kind of interesting, actually. It's it sounds stupid, but he's kind of making a good point. The writing on that show was amazing. And that's one that really, really stuck out to me very much, and is still a favorite of mine. And whenever I see William Shatner, I like go, okay, I'll hear what he has to say. Like when he went up in that space ship recently, whatever that was, I thought, oh my God, that is so cool. This guy is just perfect. He is like just he is an American treasure. He really is.
He really is.
So that was one. I the movies that I watched, I don't remember the any of them really sticking out to me that much, or even books at that point. The books that had the biggest impact on me, the ones that I talk about in the book, are actually three. There are three books that had a huge impact on me. Perhaps the greatest was Russell Miller's unauthorized biography of L. Ron Hubbard, Madman or Messiah, which is an absolutely brilliantly constructed and fabulously researched book about the life of Hubbard that I had believed when I was in Scientology was just all lies. And it is so far from that. is the thing that finally sort of broke my mesmerization with respect to Hubbad. The other one was, the second is Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, another stunningly brilliant book about, and you know, for me, I hope that my book will go, people will go, well, if he could do it, I can do it. Viktor Frankl's book is like, if this guy survived and is still sane and has compassion and empathy for other people, anybody can. Just literally, this is like the most stunning story that anybody has ever written as a memoir. And you know, it's not. I mean, it is a memoir, but it's so much more than a memoir. Right. It doesn't do justice to the book to call it a memoir. And then the third is a fairly easy to digest and understand book by Professor Martha Stout called The Sociopath Next Door. Mm-hmm. And that one also had a profound impact on me because it made me realize that David Miscavige isn't a unicorn, that he has recognizable characteristics that there are plenty of other people have, that I wasn't, I wasn't in the presence of something that was so bizarre that nobody would ever understand it or believe it. And it gave me some comfort to recognize that this is actually he is actually an identifiable personality type. Mm-hmm. And that I wasn't crazy, that this is real. This really does happen. People like this really do exist. They really do abuse people. They really have no conscience. Whatever, all the stuff that she talks about in the book. And so those three books, if I can identify anything that had the greatest impact on me since escaping Scientology, it is those three books.
I'm going to put links to those. I've read Viktor Frankl's is one I revisit every few years, and I've read the Sociopath book. I've been meaning to read the Barefaced Messiah. So I think you just sold it for me. So I'm going to have to get a copy of that and read it. But yeah, I guess I've already said it, but just reiterating just the amazing thing of having time to do things that you get to choose what you want to. I think a lot of people, and it's a good thing, they have a hard time wrapping their heads around that, but it's amazing when you don't have this thing consuming you and stressing you. I can't imagine what it does to the nervous system, living like that, especially in Scientology.
Yeah, well, it's not good, I can tell you that. and many people comment, and I also do the same. Like the infamous interview, I put in quotation marks, that was the final straw before I escaped, with John Sweeney in London, John Sweeney from the BBC. I look at that footage and, people say, you look like you just got out of a prison camp. You look so gray, gaunt, sickly, glazed over eyes, starey man. And it's true. I had been in the hole for 2 years almost, sleep deprived, food deprived, pleasure deprived, freedom deprived. And it's very apparent in how I look in that situation, that that this just isn't imagination. It's not, you can see the physical evidence that I wasn't in good physical or mental shape by that point. I was really fucked up. And I have since that time very often thanked John Sweeney, who became and has become a good friend of mine. And I even mentioned in the book, you know, he came to my wedding to my current wife all the way from England, for being the catalyst that finally, I mean, John Sweeney is really the straw that broke the camel's back. He certainly wasn't the entire cause. You know, I write in the book about what a long process this was to have inklings and seedlings of doubt and concern and worry and thoughts, and shove them aside and go, well, you know, if other people can survive this, so can I. If nobody else is leaving, why would I? If I leave, what's going to happen to my family? Oh my God, what's going to happen to my eternity? Am I going to, you know, become a black cinder burning for eternity in the cold nether reaches of space? What, like all of these thoughts that are inculcated into you as a Scientologist, and particularly at the top levels of Scientology, that moment when he starts asking me about, you know, isn't it true that David Miscavige has physically assaulted you? And I'm going, nope, that's an absolute lie, John, and I will sue you. And like, I'm standing there, I walked away from that interview going, what am I doing? What has my life become? I'm standing here in the doorway of a Scientology organization in London, lying to protect David Miscavige because it would be bad, or I can't tell the truth about the fact that he is physically assaulting people, including me. How insane is this? This isn't why I came into Scientology. This isn't why I signed a billion-year contract with the Sea Organization. That's not what it was for. It was to help L. Ron Hubbard save mankind. And now I'm standing here helping David Miscavige cover up his misdemeanors and misdeeds. And I still, though, was, you know, I can't abandon my family. I just can't do that. It's like such a violation of what I thought was my personal integrity. And then Miscavige just sort of put it over the edge and said, I'm never coming back to the United States. And I was going to be sent off to Western Australia to sell my body on the streets. And I went, okay, there is absolutely nothing left for me. I have got to get out of here. Nothing could be worse than this. And that, you know, the day after that is I was gone.
Right.
I don't know why I got off into that ramble.
No, that's
I told you early, I ramble.
No, it's I think it's a good teaser for the book. People definitely need to get your book, A Billion Years. That was great, Mike. Thank you so much. So one last thing, anything you would like to add as we kind of finish up our conversation today to our listeners?
I kind of, the one message that I would love people to get out of this book is it's never too late to change. It is never too late to change the circumstances of your life. It's never too late to open a new door and walk through it. It seems sometimes like it couldn't possibly happen. It's going to be too hard. I won't make it or whatever. But I think I'm pretty good evidence that it can actually be done if you really want to change and really want things to be different in your life. The right thing to do is to do something. The wrong thing to do is to just, I wish I had not persisted and lasted as long as I did. I wish I had had the guts, the courage, whatever, to make that move a lot sooner than I did. But I'm sure glad I did when I did. and I'm not still there today.
Yeah. Well, and then the book would be shorter too. So we we love the book. A Billion Years, My Escape from a Life in the Highest Ranks of Scientology. Mike Rinder, thank you so much. This has been personally one of this has been an interview that means a lot to me. I'm a big fan of your work, and I appreciate everything you've done. So it was an honor to meet you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kyle. It was a real pleasure. This is just a conversation between friends. This didn't feel like an interview at all.
Right. No, this is great. This was this was a beautiful thing. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Take care, Mike.
Okay, you too.